Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Suchon.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we are heading out to New York City, and I'm excited about this week's podcast. We're talking about written journalism, whether it's print or online, investigative journalism, political journalism. Our guest this week is Will Fritz. He attended San Diego State from 2015 through 2019. He was the editor-in-chief of the Daily Aztec. He has written for a wide variety of different publications that we'll get into. These days, he is a reporter for the American Independent, where he covers extremism and LGBTQ issues. Will, it's always wonderful to connect with another former editor-in-chief. Welcome to the Where You At podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm also always happy to talk to another fellow EIC.
All right, so I'm going to begin by embarrassing Will, because at the end of this podcast, we like to brag about other alums who are making us proud. And I do not make a list of the different people who have gotten shout outs. But if I did, overwhelmingly, Will Fritz would be at the top of people who have gotten shout outs from his friends and former colleagues. I feel like there would be mutiny if I did not eventually interview Will. And a couple of the things that they've always said to me, Will, is number one, they don't know when you ever slept. And number two, they felt like you were a professional reporter almost immediately as a student. So as humbly as you want to answer this question, tell us, number one, when you sleep and when you felt like you were a professional reporter.
Yeah, I don't know about all that. That's very nice to hear. But when did I sleep? I'm actually not sure, because I worked overnight shifts at McDonald's for my first 2 years of college. So I was like doing the Daily Aztec and working overnight shifts. So I'm not totally sure when I slept, actually. Definitely was surviving off like 3 hours of sleep and 5 hour energy for a little while there. And when did I become a professional journalist was the next question, I think.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I guess, there's an argument to be made that I think that you are a professional journalist the second that you start writing for, even if it is a student newspaper. And I was always very, I would tell writers, when I was like an editor, don't look at yourself as student journalist. You are doing the job. You are already doing the job. But I definitely wouldn't say that I felt totally confident right off the bat. I still don't know if I feel totally confident. I still might not be a professional journalist. So I don't know. That's a hard question to answer.
Okay, well, maybe this one will be a little bit easier, because I think about when I reflect on my life and my career, and I think about the magazines that I read as a kid and the books that my parents got me, and just reading newspapers and watching TV and watching 60 Minutes, and how I didn't even realize it at the time, but I was kind of learning journalism as a kid. So for you,
Yeah.
who were the influences? What publications, TV shows were the influences that got you going?
Yeah, I would say I just read like pretty much everything. I was a voracious reader as a kid. And then at some point I just started, I became interested in current events pretty young, actually. I remember I was, I think, 11 when the 2008 election happened. And I remember that was like the first election that I really paid close attention to. And so, yeah, I would just consume all types of political news media. I'd be reading the New York Times as like a 12-year-old. I'd be reading NPR's website. My mom also really liked NPR. And so we listened to that a lot. I'd go see my grandparents. I'd read all the way through their Press Enterprise newspaper up in Riverside. And so, yeah, I just from a very young age, I was just consuming a lot of different news media, I would say.
And then when did you think, this is what I want to do, or this is what I actually will do with my career?
Yeah, so I don't know if there was ever one moment, because the thing is, I'm impatient, and so like there are lots of jobs that like would have seemed interesting to me, but you have to be in school for like 7 years to even be able to do any of it. Like I have a friend who's a lawyer, and it's like, would I really have wanted to go through 4 years of college and then 3 years of law school and then like clerkships and stuff? And to even be able to start doing the job, like, no, I'm too impatient for that. So what I appreciated about journalism was that, I started volunteering at the Daily Aztec my second semester, my freshman year, and I was like immediately doing the job already. There was no waiting period. There was no, I was just already thrown into it. And so I think that was why I fell in love with it.
Why San Diego State? Why'd you pick San Diego State? Tell us about the journey to get you on campus.
I'd say I don't think my mom ever wanted me to go to San Diego State because my mom went to UC San Diego. And so I remember as a kid, we actually had a license plate frame on our car that said UC San Diego, the smart ones, the implication being that SDSU was the dumb ones. So I remember I was touring colleges and I like asked my mom like, can we see SDSU? My mom was like not like super pleased about that. But we did go see it, and I remember stepping on campus. And like true story, I remember like as soon as I was on campus, like just having a feeling. I was like, I think I am gonna go here. Like I could just tell in my gut. But backing up a little further than that, this is going to be a slightly long-winded story, but you'll understand where I'm going with it in a minute, though. So my dad was a huge science fiction dork growing up, and he loved this TV show called Babylon 5 that was from the 90s. And it was written and produced and created by this guy named J. Michael Straczynski, who was a former Daily Aztec alum, former San Diego State student. And so because my dad made me watch that, I think in like middle school or something. And so from the time I was like 12, like I knew what the Daily Aztec was just by like knowing this writer's history and stuff. And so, it did, once I like set foot on the campus, like it did feel very fitting. I was like, I could see myself going here. I could see myself working for the Daily Aztec because that would just that would make sense. Right. So yeah, that's the story.
It's a good story. And that was not that long-winded. I like that story a lot. When it came to taking classes, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about journalism, but what were some of your other just non-journalism memories, classes, hangouts, just what life was like as a college student for you aside from journalism?
I do remember the first semester actually just feeling very out of place because I don't know if SGSU was still that much of a party school, but it definitely was in 2015. And I remember being like, I am not prepared for all of these people being ridiculous. So it did take, like that first semester, I definitely was like, wow, what am I doing here? But once I like got on the paper, then I feel like I found my home. And as far as what classes, and stuff, the issue is that I think I did live and breathe journalism like most of my time at SDSU. So I'd be hard pressed to find a memory that's not somewhat journalism related because that was like basically what I was doing to the extent of I was probably like not paying as much attention to classes as I should have been. But it paid off and I have been employed since then. So,
I don't know how you quantify how much a party school San Diego State is or was, but I do know that a few years ago, Playboy.com put a dig on San Diego State and said that it was the worst party school in America. And
wow,
I think it was because something was written that basically they called San Diego State student newspaper a bunch of narcs because they wrote something about Sturgis and how it became this huge super spreader event. And so they declared that San Diego State was the worst party school in the country.
Well, I haven't seen that, but that's hilarious.
All right. So since the Daily Aztec was such a huge part of your life, let's get into this. You actually tweeted something the other day that had something to do with Freedom of Information Act requests. And so let's start by talking about Freedom of Information Act requests. Do you remember the first time that you put in a Freedom of Information Act request and just the process of it?
See, the thing is, actually, I don't remember the first one because I feel like I sent so many of them that they all just like blur together. I definitely had to have sent at least like 20, 25, 30, something in that realm. It really is like not too difficult to make those though, once you realize like all the stuff that is public information and that like should be provided to you, like it just made me really like upset when the university would withhold things. And so I'm like, you know what? No, like I'm going to get this information. And so I would just like look up, I think the first time I just looked up a template or something, or I may have gotten it from Andrew Dyer actually, since he had done that before Southwestern. And, it's not difficult. You just fill in the stuff you want and send it off. And, and then a couple months later, if they're not violating laws, then you should get your information. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, you did. And the reason why I bring it up is I never filled out a Freedom of Information Act request in my 3.5 years working at the Daily Aztec, and I spent 10 years working for a newspaper, and I never filled out a Freedom of Information Act request. And I'm feeling like a really negligent journalist because I never did so. But I remember when I was working on a book, it was a true crime that I filled out my first couple ones, and it was exciting. It was like, oh, I should have been doing this for a long time, and I think that that's just an important skill that I think that any journalist, especially one who was starting off as a student, really needs to understand the power and the effective ways of filling out Freedom of Information Act requests. So what other advice can you give us about them?
God, I don't know. Just like, don't be afraid to send them. Don't be afraid to don't be afraid to like ask for too much because they will tell you if they can't give you something, just don't be afraid of hurting feelings. Like I know that I think I did hurt some feelings sometimes when I when I sent FOIA requests, but it's also like, sorry, that's my job. So you just got to be fearless. And I will credit to because I know you already interviewed Andrew Dyer. I will credit him too with some of that impressioning me with that fearlessness, because I think like that was already there in me to an extent, but Andrew really gave me permission to be like my best journalist self, I would say, at the Daily Aztec. There was no investigative idea that I had where he would be like, no, don't do that, which isn't always the case.
So when I did interview Andrew Dyer a few weeks ago, we talked a lot about the controversy over the mascot. And so I don't want to say you can't talk about that, but I do want to get into other different stories that really were meaningful to you, where you really learned about a lot about yourself and about journalism, stories that you took pride in. And so when you reflect on all of your time at the Daily Aztec, what is a story or two that stands out to you and why?
I'll start with one that did require a public records request, since I don't think I answered your question, necessarily about an example of one. Phi Kappa Theta, a fraternity, got kicked off campus in, I think, like November 2017 or something like that. And I was the news editor at the time, I believe. This was actually, I think, one of the student government's elected officials or something was a member of that fraternity. And so, it was kind of a big deal. And I remember us, trying to write about it. And I asked, the university, to explain why they were kicked off, and they wouldn't. And I hope I don't get you in trouble or make you lose your funding or something, but they refused to explain why. And I remember just being like, no, this is public information. Like it would be one thing if I was asking for like student identifying information, but I'm not. I don't need to identify any students. I don't need any disciplinary records. Like but you can't just kick off a fraternity and just be like, we're not going to tell you why. So I submitted a Public Records Act request for it, and got the information from them a couple months later. And it was funny because I had the way I had written or requested the information, I had requested communications from certain university officials for like I think maybe a few month time span up until the day that I submitted the request. And so what that meant was they had to include their communications reacting to the public records request in the information they gave me. Meaning I got some really entertaining emails. One of them was like all caps, I knew it was coming. And I'm like, if you knew it was coming, why are we doing this the hard way? But so we ended up putting out this story though in I think January 2018 about what had happened with this fraternity, and it was like years of disciplinary issues of them just filing different policies, and then the university just like consistently covering for them, divulging as little information as possible, giving them chance after chance after chance, right up until the end, where they wouldn't explain to us why they were being kicked off, even though they were being removed from campus, which is pretty egregious. So I was really proud of that one. I think that one won an SPJ award or something, but I don't remember. I can try to think of another example.
As you're thinking of another example, I'm going to chime in with another little tip about filing Freedom of Information Act requests. And I can't remember where I learned this, but I know that I did it once, again, when I was doing my my book, Murder in Pleasanton, I was wondering if somebody else was working on this story or if somebody else was working on a book about this. And so I started to get a little bit paranoid about how many other people might be working on this. And so I put in a request to find out anybody else who has put in a request for information about these different subjects. And so part of the information that I got back was that nobody else has. And I went, okay, sigh of relief. At least there might be somebody else who is working on this, but there is nobody else who is trying to get Freedom of Information Act requests. And so I felt like, okay, I think I might be alone in working on this story.
Yeah, that is a good tip. I don't think I've done that before, but I will definitely keep that in mind. So thanks for sharing that tip with me. But yeah, I'm thinking of another story I'm proud of. This one was really tragic, but I'm also really proud of our reporting and how we handled it. There was this student who was killed coming back from a football game, and she was struck by a car while like crossing the freeway. And it was a pretty crazy case. And I remember I was the weekend reporter at City News Service, which is like a regional wire service in Southern California. And so my job actually was like on the weekends to, just cover the breaking news stuff, like, like crime, police shootings, fires, different emergency situations. And I had remembered, like seeing like when I got in on Sunday morning, that like there had been an incident of someone being struck by a vehicle on the 8 freeway on Saturday night. And I didn't really think anything of it because, like, as sad as it is to say, like, stuff like that does happen, and like that I would frequently be writing stories like that, every weekend. But then I came into the Daily Aztec office on Monday morning, and I remember seeing different people in the office were talking about that this girl had gone missing, and that her friends were posting flyers and stuff and posting stuff on Facebook. And then I'm thinking, the gears are turning in my head, and I'm like, well, when was the last time they saw her? Okay, like 4 or 5 o'clock Saturday. When did this? And then I'm thinking, I'm like, I swear I saw something about an accident or something on Saturday. And I'm going back through the records, or the archives or whatever, and I find it on the city news service site. And I'm like, these two things must be connected because of how close they are together. And so I ended up calling the medical examiner's office, and they weren't even, I think, supposed to divulge the information at that time. But I called them, and they were saying, well, we can't tell you the name of the student. And I'm like, okay, well, now I'm not asking you to tell me a name. I will tell you the name, and can you just say yes or no? Is this the person? And I did that, and then they kind of sheepishly was like, yes. And I'm like, all right, well, there's the story. And we ended up breaking that news before anybody else in San Diego, and just kind of resolving the everyone's questions about what happened, which it was really tragic though. But I was proud of that we were able to do it before anybody else, and get it out there.
Let's talk a little bit more about this, because as you start to further report this, and especially when there's missing persons flyers on campus, it is quite possible that you end up talking to someone and they don't know yet, or the news is really, really fresh to them. So describe the compassion that you try to maintain when reporting on a tragedy like this, while also still making sure that you get the pertinent information for your story.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just really important to be human, I mean, and I know that's like an obvious answer. I will say, like, early in my journalism career, I kind of felt like a little bit pressured to, it seems like there are a lot of journalists who will do anything to get the story, and I kind of felt like that was the way I needed to be. But by the time I was reporting on this story, and this is kind of how I feel now, it's like you can't, like, the story isn't everything. You do still need to be a person first, and you can tell people, look, like, I if you don't want to talk to me, like, I understand. I don't ever want to be the type of journalist who's pressuring someone to talk to me who's clearly not ready and clearly not in an emotional state to be able to do that. And so, and yeah, sometimes that comes at the detriment of, maybe I haven't gotten a quote or something that someone else would have if they were pushier. But I'd rather be a good person than push someone to say something that they're not able to say or ready to say. And so, yeah, I think it just comes down to trying to be a decent person. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, you did. And I'll just add to that by, look, I never covered cops and crimes and things like that, but I covered a number of stories in which that involved writing about someone passing away. And I know that the thing that I learned was that my usual go-to first question was, tell me what made this person such a good friend, or tell me your best memories of being with this person. And once you start off with something that's not about the death, but it's about a place of happiness, then it usually just gets people going. And then at that point, you never know how long they're going to talk. They might get super emotional. It might be cathartic for them to get super emotional. But I know that when you phrase the question in a way of, tell me something positive about this person and their life, then I think it just adds to such richer details about that person.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I mean, it just really helps to kind of approach the situation like trying to be, even though, you might not know this person they're interviewing, but still just trying to be a compassionate friend almost, in that, you don't want to just be, getting all the horrible details. You do want a human element to it.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Daily Aztec and actually kind of like the business side of trying to keep it going. Because when I was there in the 90s, we published 5 days a week. And just about everybody got paid. They may have not gotten paid a lot, but they got paid a little something. These days, I was just on campus about a month ago, and I think they publish once a month, but it is digital, and there's audio and there's video, and it's very much a multimedia thing. From your time that you were at the Daily Aztec, what were some of the non-traditional print things that you and your colleagues did to try to evolve and just keep this great legacy going?
Yeah, I remember by the time I started, we were already printing weekly, and so we would say we can still say we're the Daily Aztec because we're daily online. That was what we would say. But I think around my junior year we started doing a live show, and I have to credit Mireya Lopez, who I you know what, I forget where she works now, but I think she's up in the Bay Area somewhere now. But she was the one who had really started that. And I mean, it really took off, and I think they still do that to this day. And it was a great, thing to start doing. It was a great thing to, kind of watch the ground, watch kids coming in on the ground floor and building that up. I think it added something to the Daily Aztec in that, like, it was able to train a lot of those students to do, TV and multimedia news in a way that we hadn't been able to train people to do that before because we were just print. I can think of a couple people off the top of my head who I think were able to get jobs in TV news because they had clips from doing that Daily Aztec live show. And I think that's probably the best example I can think of.
So again, because I'm a super old man, I could just walk around campus and see people reading the paper, or I'd get to a classroom early and I would see people reading the newspaper. How did you track to know whether people are reading on their phones or on laptops, and seeing like how the impact of your reporting of these stories is going on campus?
I mean, yeah, we had Google Analytics, so it wasn't hard to see, there were definitely some stories that got, thousands, tens of thousands of views depending on it. Obviously, people weren't reading all of the stories. Unfortunately, people just aren't that interested in student news, I guess. But we definitely did get quite a few stories that got a lot of clicks. And I mean, there were stories too where even if I wasn't looking at the numbers, I would know that it was a big deal because it, would become kind of like the talk of campus, like stuff like the Aztec mascot, stuff like the fraternity stories, where those were just talked about in conversations where I was like, oh wow, like this is actually having an impact. Like random people who I don't even know were bringing this story up, or I hear them talking about it.
All right. So your final year at San Diego State, I believe, was 2019. And
Yeah.
so it's always a challenge to start transferring away from being a student and into being a professional. And even more challenging for you is that less than a year later, the world changed drastically with the coronavirus. And so let's get into your journey of how you ultimately ended up in New York, where you are now, but also just there's fewer and fewer jobs that are out there, and it's hard to get them. It's hard to keep them. And then you had this global pandemic that made things even more difficult, Will.
I mean, yeah, I've been really lucky to mostly stay employed, other than I did get laid off in like 2022, and then I was freelancing for a little bit. But I've still, I've been able to not starve to death, so that's good. But my first two jobs out of college, actually, I was fortunate because I basically got them because I had already done the jobs. I was working at City News Service on the weekends, while I think like my junior and senior year. And that was my weekend, like crime cops beat reporting stuff. And so they had an opening out in Indio, out in the desert, and I did that for my first few months after I graduated from college. And then, fortunately, though, there was an opening at my hometown community paper in Temecula. And I knew the editor very well because I'd worked with her over summers and stuff. And she was basically like, look, like, come and work for us, like you'll get to do more of what you want to do, which was like, I think City News Service is a great experience. But like, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but it is just like wire service stuff. You don't really get bylines. And, I wanted bylines, and I wanted to be able to be out there doing reporting that isn't just calling, the Palm Springs Police Department and asking them to give me a statement on something. And so, yeah, I ended up going back out to my hometown in Temecula and doing a lot of work that I'm proud of, a lot of education reporting, a lot of local government reporting. The thing is, though, without getting into too much, because I'm still on good terms with like the publisher and stuff. But I think we would both agree that we had some political differences as the pandemic was happening, as like the George Floyd protests were happening, and I kind of realized that I want to be in a space where I can be more, like I'm a progressive journalist and not just a middle of the road journalist. One of those was covering the George Floyd protests, because we had a protest happening in the Temecula Duck Pond, which is like the Central Park of Temecula, basically. And I remember seeing the police break out tear gas for, the protesters. And these are like 16, 17-year-old kids. These are, like not that it would be any better if it was any other age, but I remember especially being like, okay, this is crazy. I can't just be here as like a middle of the road journalist. Like this is something that should be called out. And so that kind of got the gears turning in my head that I wanted to do something more like what I'm doing now. But and I'm sorry, I know I'm probably rambling because I had so many jobs after college too, because I ended up so first, before I even got to where I am now, I ended up taking a job at this like website that covers class action news, which wasn't totally what I wanted to be doing. But as we all know, journalism jobs don't pay that well, and it was between that and like this small paper in Colorado. And as much as I wanted the Colorado paper job, I was like, okay, well, I have to eat, unfortunately. So going with the class action one. But that was one that ended up basically making me be able to move to New York because it was remote. And so my thinking was, you know what? I'm going to take this job. It's not exactly what I want to be doing, but I can use it to fund myself to get to where I want to be and go out to New York and start networking and establish myself as a New York-based journalist. And so that's what I did. I just packed everything in my car and drove for 5 days.
Why was New York such an important place that you wanted to be in order to establish yourself further as a journalist?
The thing is, in California, as much as I love, California news and stuff, there's it does feel like there's a bit of a ceiling as to how far you can go. It's like you can go like what's the most prominent paper in California? Probably the LA Times. LA Times is laying people off now, And it's like I felt more confident that I could get something that I wanted if I moved out here where, there are all kinds of media jobs. It still wasn't a guarantee that I was gonna survive in journalism. But to me, it felt like a better bet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I don't know if this is a good time to bring it up, but Will and I are talking over Zoom, and over his shoulder, there is a license plate. It's a California license plate, and it says Fritz. Please tell us the story of Fritz.
Yeah, so it is an SDSU fraternity story. I you know what? I forget which frat it was actually now, but it may have been Phi Cap actually, like that initial Phi Cap story when they got kicked off. And I was reporting on it. We put out our story, and then and I had already written a few fraternity stories, and I was like infamous about this for some reason. Even though I only ever wrote 4 frat stories my whole time at SDSU, so I don't know why everyone was so pressed about it. But I had my friend Alex Piscatelli, who you already who also interviewed. She was working at KPBS with someone who was connected to SDSU frats somehow. And so when my story came out, I guess there was this group chat of like the fraternity presidents or something of that nature. And the Phi Cap president, is my understanding, is that he sent a text message to everyone saying, "We've just been fritzed," after my story came out. And I was like, you know what? I like that. So that's 7 characters. My grandparents had like vanity plates growing up, so I never knew what to put on my car. And I was like, you know what? That's what it is. That's what I'll get. So so I still have that to this day.
I'm glad that you have that perspective about it, because as you were telling the story, what came to my mind is you need to have thick skin if you are a reporter, especially when you're covering tough, difficult news that people may not want to give to you, that you have to get Freedom of Information Act's order to get it when there's group chats that are about your reporting. And so I'm wondering whether, and your friend Andrew Dyer said you have to be fearless as a reporter when I'm interviewing him. And I'm wondering how much of that just became innate for you, or how much of it is still something that you have to get used to having thick skin in this business?
I will say, like, there are a lot of things that don't necessarily come naturally to me in journalism that I do have to train myself to do, but one of them is not the thick skin part. I tell people sometimes that I saw myself as like pretty unbullyable when I was in school, because I would just like not care. I remember there being this one kid like making fun of my watch or something. I was just like, okay, like bite me. Like, what are you gonna do? And so that's just kind of always been my personality. And so yeah, it's for me, it hasn't been difficult. It's honestly, like, it's kind of fun sometimes. It's like if you're pissing people off with your reporting, then like you're probably doing something right, would be what I would say. So yeah, it really never bothered me when stuff like that would happen. There was another example of that. I never saw this firsthand, but I guess when one of my frat stories came out, there was like a frat party a couple weeks later or something. And allegedly, I have been told this secondhand, that there was like a poster of my face up at the party. And I'm just like, if you guys think that bothers me, it doesn't. Like, like, thank you. I feel honored. So yeah, fortunately, I've never really been bothered by that stuff.
All right, let's talk about your current job. Tell us about, first of all, the American Independent. For people who don't know this publication, tell us about this publication and how you started working for them.
Yeah, so it's a progressive nonprofit, and and it's kind of in the same vein of there. Obviously, in the last probably 10 years, there's been a lot more journalism entities that have popped up that take more of an overt ideological position, as opposed to just saying we're middle of the road, unfair, or fair and balanced. Which I've started to appreciate because obviously I started my career being the fair and balanced type of person, but I find that like people don't really buy that anyway. I feel like if I'm a reporter at like a mainstream newspaper, and this happened when I worked at Valley News, and I tell people, well, like we're just the facts, and like nobody believes you anyway. They think that we're all just the liberal media, and so it's actually a little helpful to be able to just say, okay, well, I'm a progressive journalist. At least people know where you stand. So yeah, we cover national politics. We have a heavy focus on competitive battleground states. I write a lot about education and LGBTQ rights pertaining to education in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan. And so yeah, I ended up working there actually as a result of he is not a San Diego State alum, but I will shout out Ethan Costin, who went to UC San Diego. This just shows the importance of making connections in journalism because we were just like Twitter mutuals for years, like we would just respond to each other's tweets about stories, but like we didn't know each other that well. And then after I got laid off in 2022, I was like freelancing and stuff for a while. I ended up working at this weekly paper for a little while too because I needed to like supplement my income. But he reached out to me. It was like, look, hey, like we've got a position opening here. Like as it was, at the time it was the LGBTQ rights position. And oh, I'm gay by the way. Even though I don't like advertise that. So it was like, so he was like, like you'd be a great fit for it, and I'm like, okay, sure. And the thing is, at first I felt kind of weird applying to it because I had always been kind of like, I wanted to be like a reporter who can do everything. I didn't just want to be pigeonholed as like the gay reporter. And I remember specifically being at the Daily Aztec and like not wanting to necessarily take on those stories all the time because I was afraid of that. I don't know what the right word is, but the word would be typecast for like actors, where it's like I didn't want that to be like, oh, that you're the gay one, so it was kind of weird for me applying for that job, but I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I overcame that because I think that I have like a pretty unique perspective and stuff on being able to report on those issues. I hope that answers your question. I never know if I'm rambling too much.
No, well, look, it's a podcast. The whole idea is to tell stories, and when they go off on different branches, that's good. The way that trees grow, and so and I'm glad that you brought up just not wanting to be typecast because I think whatever the story might be and whatever your background is, I feel like there's this fine line between, well, I have this personal connection to this story, and so I would be good to write about this topic, whether it's once or on a regular basis. But at the same time, I'm more than just this. My entire journalism or even myself as a person is not just this one thing, whatever that one thing is. And you want to be able to cover as many different stories as possible.
Definitely. So yeah, like I was afraid of that at first, but I'm glad I figured it out eventually because obviously these are topics that need to be covered, especially right now. Obviously like trans rights and LGBTQ rights are huge stories nationwide right now.
Yeah, well, that's a really good segue into a story that you did about your hometown and the anti-trans back in your hometown. And so give us, now you're living in New York at the time that this occurred, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so give us the background of how you become aware of it and you're reporting about this story from your hometown.
Yeah, well, just, Temecula has always been kind of a conservative community. And, I definitely did some reporting on them doing crazy, like extremist stuff, even when I was a local reporter there. There was one story about the like Confederate flag being painted on someone's parking spot, and the school took like 3 days to remove it. So they have like a history of doing ridiculous things. But my old coworker there, Jeff Pack, not an SDSU alum, but I'm just shouting him out because he's a great guy. But he had left our previous job, Valley News, and then he was working for he had started this political action committee to oppose the right-wing school board that had just gotten elected. We were just talking more, and I was covering these issues, and the Temecula school board just kept putting itself in the news for doing like ridiculous extremist things, like banning a curriculum that mentioned Harvey Milk, the gay civil rights leader, just different like extremist things like that, wanting to discuss implementing policies that would like require parents or require teachers to tell parents if their kids voice that they want to be a different gender or something, which obviously can be really dangerous because not everyone is in an inclusive household. And yeah, I just remember like seeing all this stuff happening and being like, okay, like who better to tell the story about it than me, having grown up there and been around a lot of this stuff, and knowing all the key players and stuff. And yeah, so that one was really I felt like it was important work, and it was really I don't know what the right word is, because I feel like we run into this a lot with journalism where I want to say something's fun, but like it's not, because it's an obviously very heavy topic. But that is just kind of what we do. So I mean, I enjoyed being able to cover it, though, I would say.
From a practical standpoint, to get some more story behind the story, are you able to
Sure.
report all of it from New York? Do you fly out? Do you stay with your parents? Are you interviewing people who you knew throughout your childhood? Give us more of the details of the boots on the ground, or the digital way of reporting the story.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, since we live in the 21st century, it is really easy to be able to do reporting now in some ways anyway, from afar. I'd say the difficult part is when you need to establish sourcing, when you don't have any sourcing, then obviously it's really helpful to be in a place. But since I had already reported there, I knew everyone who to call. And actually it was funny because it turned out the new president of the teachers union for the school district was actually my cousin's old soccer coach. So it was just like one of those things where it was like I had so many different connections, both from being a reporter there, from growing up there, that it was really easy that I just called him up. I'm like, hey, like I'm Mateo's like cousin. Like, can we talk about about what's going on with the school board? And he was able to connect me with a lot of different teachers and stuff. I knew some teachers. I knew, I had my old coworker, and so that was one of the ones where I would say that was like a really easy sourcing story, just in terms of like I had the network right there. And so I talked to even more teachers that are even in the story. I can't remember, but we definitely couldn't use all of them.
Tell us about your writing process. When you sit down to actually write the story, are you someone who can go top to bottom? Are you someone who's bouncing around all over the place? Are you someone who needs the lead before you can get to this? What is your, and I know it varies from story to story, but what's kind of
Yeah.
your MO when it's time to actually write the story?
Yeah, I think I normally do view top to bottom. Although if obviously I have like a really what I think anyway is a really good idea for a last paragraph or something, I'll write that first, like if there's anything that pops out to me. So I'd say usually maybe my process is that I'll if I can think of anything off the top of my head, then that doesn't have to be written first. But then from there, then I'll do just top to bottom. And I was also having this conversation with someone the other day that, I know there's some writers who can just like write a draft and then like reread it, rewrite it. And I like that is one thing that I don't really ever do. I don't know why, but I will like torture myself until like the correct version of the story is out. So I feel like I edit in my head. Like I do the first few drafts like in my head. I have to like go for a walk or something and have a cup of coffee. But then I come back and sit down, and then I just top to bottom or just get it done. I have the ideas in my head at that point.
I can relate to that too. There is numerous times that I thought, okay, I need to sit down and write something. And I just go, I don't know if I have the beginning yet, and I don't want to start writing until I have the beginning, because I'm just going to get frustrated and I'm just going to start like overthinking this. So yeah, I'll go for a walk, or maybe I'll write something in the middle. Maybe there's like, okay, I know that this will be good bullet points. So, okay, let me get some bullet points going here in the middle of this. I remember once when I was early in my writing career, and someone said, okay, whatever the best quote is, that's first. Whatever the second best quote is, that's how you end the story, and then figure out a way to put all the other best quotes somewhere in the middle. And I was like, okay, well that's a decent template that I can go from as well.
Yeah. And yeah, I would definitely tell like other aspiring journalists, like don't be afraid to do stuff like that. Just go for a walk and think about it first, because I feel like at least in my early career, I would like, I don't know, I like always torture myself to be like, I have to write this right now. But like it gets, it literally just like scientifically gets your brain working harder if you go and do a physical activity like walking around the block. And so that is a really great strategy to be able to get your creative juices flowing. Yeah.
We've kind of been discussing this, but I had this item written down in my notes, and I just wrote, why the hard journalism, right? Like I look at it like I worked in the sports department, and there's important stories that are not about wins and losses that need to be written about public funding for stadiums and people who are gambling when they should not be gambling. And there's a lot of money that's involved. There's people who cover concerts and food and things like that. And not that that's not important journalism, because we need to read those stories, but you do the hard journalism, Will. I mean, we're at a time where people are really angry at each other.
Yeah.
And so what is it that drives you, that makes you be willing to wade into these waters of the hard journalism?
I'm not even sure because like it just is that I like this is just what I care about more. Not that there's anything wrong with covering other topics, obviously there's all sorts of other topics that need to be covered. But just for whatever reason, this is just what I naturally gravitate to out of having I think maybe because I feel like a lot of it like my personal experiences like as a kid that I think I grew up kind of involved in these conversations already. I'd say my family is pretty liberal, but we're from Temecula, which is extremely conservative. And so I always felt like I was like in the middle of those political arguments as a young kid. And I think in a way that made this, covering the hard journals and be like one of the things that I can be really good at just in terms of that I know how to talk to everybody who, people who might disagree on lots of different topics, like I know how to kind of find the common ground. Even working at like, my explicitly progressive publication, like it is a skill that I think I have where I can talk to somebody across the aisle. And, this just happened last week where I was interviewing this conservative school board candidate. And, I told him, look, like I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna lie about what our this organization's background is. Like we are a progressive journalism organization, but I'm not going to distort anything that you're saying. If you feel comfortable talking to me, I'd appreciate it. And we had a really good conversation about, his positions and stuff. It just for whatever reason, this is just appears to be what I'm good at or what I'd like to think I'm good at. So this is what I'm sticking to, I guess.
From that standpoint, as we start to wrap things up here, when it is something that you're interested in already, so much discussion nowadays about mental health and for journalists, and when it is such a hot button issue, it's really hard to turn it off, right? It's hard to turn off the feed on your social media. It's hard not to just continue doom scrolling and reading story after story that either really make you angry or whatever the emotions from what you're reading. What are some of the things that you do just to try to step away from it, however long you need to step away from it before you step back into it?
Yeah, I mean, something that has become kind of important for me to do is I will just like straight up turn my phone off for a Saturday or Sunday sometimes where I'm just like, look, this is my job having to pay attention to the news, so I'm like not going to make myself do it in my off time. Especially since, where I work right now, I don't have to do like breaking news usually anyway. I just try to really tell myself like, look, like it's okay to be offline for a couple of days. Yeah, I just try to focus on, just the fun stuff about life. Like I live in New York City. I'm like, look, I'll go do fun New York City things. I don't have to be all serious all the time. But I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing things, though, I would say. I'm pretty good at just being like, okay, like I'm done. I'm not thinking about, extremism until Monday morning. And I think you have to be good at doing that in this kind of job.
Okay, as we continue to wrap things up here, and I'm probably going to say the phrase, as we continue to wrap things up here multiple times more here, I wanted to give you the floor for anything that I should have asked, that I didn't ask, anything else that you think is important, whether it's a lesson that you've learned or something that you want to pass along, or just something that you think is important about this conversation for current journalists or future journalists who want to get into doing something, either what you're doing or similar to what you're doing, Will.
Yeah, one thing I didn't talk about that much was my whole period after I got laid off in May 2022, I think. And, like laying off is like a rite of passage for journalists. So I think it's important to talk about that and make new journalists be aware that like, yeah, that might be something you have to experience. And I remember I was so like scared before that of being laid off. I was like, what am I going to do? I don't really like, I don't know about everybody else, but I don't have like, rich parents who can just send me rent money. So I was like very, very terrified of that. But I'm glad it happened to me because it kind of taught me that I will be fine no matter what. As soon as I got laid off, I tweeted about it and I was having people send me freelance opportunities and stuff. And so like right away, I already was working again within like a week, so I was making ends meet doing that. I'm also like not the sort of person who's afraid to go and do, just any job just to, because, I do have to eat as I think I've said before. And so, I was like walking dogs on the side and stuff on the Upper East Side in New York. It was a very main character job actually, but, I was doing that, doing as much freelancing as I could. I ended up going and taking a job at a weekly paper in up in Scarsdale. That was great people at that job. They unfortunately did shut down the paper like a couple months ago. But great people at that job. I do remember feeling at the time a little bit like it was a step back just because I had already worked in that kind of job already. And it was just kind of like really hard not to be down on myself. Like, wow, I moved all the way to New York City and I got the same job that I had right out of college, basically. But, you just have to hold out hope, which I know is easier said than done. But, I just had to remind myself while I was applying for job after job after job, it's not about you if you get rejected. Oftentimes, like, maybe they know whoever it is they're hiring. Maybe someone else has slightly more experience in a different field they want, but that doesn't mean that you're not, worthy of a job. You will get something. You just have to keep trying. And so, I eventually was able to get the job I have now. So I think it is just really important to not give up when you're in kind of that post layoff zone, because like it's probably going to happen to you at some point.
I just want to follow up on what Will said about if you do get laid off. I'm really glad that you told people, because when I got laid off, I did not. And it's something that I regret. If I could do it all over again, I would have put it out there on social media. I would have told everybody. It's not that I was embarrassed, but I basically didn't want sympathy. I didn't want people like, they do that head tilt. They're like, oh, how are you? Oh,
I know. I hate that too.
Yeah. And so I didn't want that. And so I still told people here and there, and I'd call people and I'd email people, but I didn't like blast it out into the world. And if there's anything that I learned, and it's something that I tell people, is blast it out to the world, because someone out there will hopefully help you. There's people that want to help you, that might point you in the right direction. And like Will said, you're going to get laid off at some point. There's very few people who do not. It is not personal. I feel like you're not a real journalist until you get laid off or fired for something. And so you just have to get back to work at finding your next job. And a big part of that is telling people, I'm looking for work here.
Yeah. That's only I would add to that too, is that self-promotion is so important. And I'm saying that as someone, like, I'm so bad at self-promotion. I hate it. I hate like it was hard for me to even like post that I gotten laid off, because like, I don't know, I just don't like seeking attention, but it is so important, and it's definitely something I need to work on. Like I remember one time I was a student. I remember someone bringing up some other student who absolutely great journalists, like not throwing them under the bus in any way. They're definitely doing what they were supposed to be doing, but like posting about their awards. And then this professor, I think, was like, "Oh, that's the person who gets all the awards." And I remember being like, "I get a lot of awards too, but I am not as good about posting about it." So like definitely no, there's no such thing as too much posting as a journalist, I think, which is something I have to remind myself often.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap things up by bragging about different individuals who we are proud of from San Diego State. Normally, I let the guest go first, but I'm going to go first because it involves bragging about something that was accomplished. So it was last weekend, and I'm doing some literal spring cleaning, and I'm filing things away into this filing cabinet. And as I'm going through this filing cabinet, I see a whole bunch of different folders and manila envelopes, and I start going through it, and I stumbled upon a note that I received, and this is my shout out. It goes to Deanne Mackey. She is currently the general manager of KPBS. And she wrote me a handwritten card, which I'm going to read. It's dated May 14th, 1996. And she wrote, "Dear Josh, congratulations on the Daily Aztec's first place for general excellence. As a former Aztec editor-in-chief, I share your pride. It's nice to see the paper get some recognition. Regards, Deanna M. Mackey." And the reason why Deanna knew this is because I blasted on the front page of the Daily Aztec, "Simply the best," because we won first place at SIPA, which is the California Interscholastic Press Association. My headline was literally "Simply the best," to brag about us winning first place. And that's how Deanne knew it. And so shout out to Deanne Mackey. She is the general manager of KPBS. And she also, she's been there a really long time. She is fantastic. In 2015, she co-founded Public Media Women in Leadership, that provides mentorship and training for women in her industry and addresses the issue of gender inequity in public media. She has a decorated career in journalism. I'm going to get her on this podcast at one point, probably soon as well. But shout out to Deanne Mackey, another former Daily Aztec editor-in-chief.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, there's so many of us. Yeah, it was hard for me to figure out who I was going to shout out because you've interviewed like half of my friends. But two people I don't think you've interviewed yet. One is Jocelyn Moran. She was my managing editor when I was editor in chief. Great journalist, great person. I just saw her actually last week. She works at the NBC affiliate in the San Francisco Bay Area. So yeah, like I said, amazing journalist, amazing on-air presence. The other one is Kemi Giwa. She was my opinion editor when I was EIC. And she works on Capitol Hill now in Washington, D.C. I always tell her that I think that she's the most successful out of all of us because, getting to work on Capitol Hill, that's insane. She is a communications, you know what, I might be getting this wrong. I think she's a communications officer for, God, I can't remember, one of the committees, though.
All right. I'm going to get those names and I'm going to add that to my master spreadsheet. Before we wrap things up, what is your ultimate dream job, Will, that you hope to accomplish? Or what is the ultimate story that you hope that you are working on at some point before your career is finished?
I've always thought, I don't know about necessarily for this specific organization, but like I loved the work that like Jared Holt did at Right Wing Watch. I don't know if you know who that is, but I do love kind of doing that real like deep extremism coverage. I would really love to get the opportunity to do something like that someday. We'll see if that happens. There are fewer and fewer journalism jobs, unfortunately, but that is definitely something I would like to do.
Well, we like to throw it out into the universe. Manifest it, dream it, believe it, whatever the case might be. So we'll see if it comes to fruition.
Yes, we'll see.
Yes. All right, Will. Thank you so much for your stories, your insight, being so generous with your time. I really enjoyed this. And I hope students learn a lot from it. I think they will.
Thanks. Yeah, I've enjoyed being here.
Once again, that is Will Fritz. And my name is Josh Suchon. I'm your host of the Where You At podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms in person or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.